My daughter's birthday party was empty, but then my sister whispered, "Why would anyone come? She's just like her mother." My daughter overheard. Her cake drooped. But then a helicopter landed in the field nearby and out came soldiers chanting her name. They were her pen pals. "She's just like her mother," Candace whispered, smirking, holding a plastic cup of rose. "Why would anyone come?" Leona stood behind us. She'd heard everything. Her face fell like the frosting on her cake that started to melt in the late afternoon sun. Then she turned and walked into the house, clutching the blade she was going to use to cut her birthday cake. I just stood there. Still. Cold. I didn't think I'd ever be writing something like this. But today something cracked in me and I don't know if I'll ever be able to patch it back up. I, 38 female, am a single mom to my daughter Leona, 11 female. We live in my late parents' house, in a quiet, once idyllic town in upstate New York called Willow Creek. It's the kind of town where everyone used to know each other by name, where church bells still ring on Sundays, and the grocery store cashier will ask about your mom even if she's been gone for a decade. After my divorce 3 years ago, I moved back home. Charles, my ex, left us after what he called years of emotional starvation, which I still struggle to understand. I was tired, yes. I was trying to juggle teaching, cooking, cleaning, and helping Leona with her reading delays, but I never stopped trying. He just stopped caring. Leona is everything I ever hoped for in a daughter. She's the kind of girl who notices baby worms on the sidewalk after it rains and moves them to safety with a twig. She writes letters to animals, to strangers, to the moon. She colors inside the lines not because someone told her to, but because she wants everything to be peaceful. But she doesn't have many friends. We moved in the middle of her 4th grade year. She's quiet and quirky, and in today's world, that might as well be a target on her back. I've tried to help her branch out, inviting classmates over, organizing carpool, sending cupcakes to school, but the kids kept their distance. It's like they smelled the smoke of our burnt life and decided not to get close. This year, Leona really wanted a birthday party. She didn't ask for much. "We don't need a bounce house," she said. "Just some decorations and maybe a cake shaped like a wolf." She loves wolves. She says they're strong but gentle. Loyal. Misunderstood. She thinks she's one of them. Maybe she is. I worked extra tutoring sessions to save up for her party. I painted paw prints down the driveway, bought plates with silver snowflakes, and rented a cotton candy machine from a guy I went to high school with who now manages an event supply business out of his garage. We hand-delivered invitations to her classmates. She even handed one to Noelle, the only girl she occasionally talks to at school. "We're friends now," she told me, folding the last invitation like it was a fragile piece of origami. She gave me her extra rainbow gel pen during art. The morning of the party, Leona was up at 6 a.m. She put on her wolf t-shirt, brushed her hair twice, and arranged paper snowflakes around the backyard. I swear, I hadn't seen her that hopeful in months. By 2 p.m., no one had arrived. By 2:30, still no one. At 3:15, Leona said, "Maybe they're just late." She sat on the swing set alone, humming to herself, swinging low. I kept checking my phone. Nothing. I checked the street again. Empty. The cupcake sat untouched. The cotton candy started to melt. A light breeze blew the paper plates across the yard. I made a show of fluffing the gift table, but my stomach was sinking like a stone. Then, at 3:45, my sister Candace showed up with her 3 boys, tornadoes and sneakers. They didn't say hello to Leona. They ran past her, straight to the cotton candy machine and started arguing over flavors. Candace came in like she always does, overdressed and underwhelmed. She hugged me with one arm while looking around like she was surveying a failed investment. "Cute setup," she said. "Little quiet, though, huh?" I bit my tongue. It was just the 2 of us at the table then, sipping from mismatched solo cups. She leaned in and said it. I don't even think she meant to say it out loud. I think she thought she was being clever, cruel in that passive way she's always been since we were kids. Why would anyone come? She's just like her mother. She laughed. Just a puff of air. But Leona had walked up behind us. She was holding the cake blade. She'd heard everything. She didn't say a word. Just turned around, cake in hand, and walked into the house. That was the moment something inside me broke. I stared after her, and for a second, I saw myself at her age. I remembered my 12th birthday when our dad didn't come home because he was drinking at the bar 2 towns over. My mother had stood there with a half-deflated balloon in her hand, trying not to cry. I turned to Candace and said, "Get out." She blinked. "What?" "Take your kids. Go." She rolled her eyes. "You're always so sensitive," I said. "Go." She left in a huff, dragging her boys behind her. One of them dropped a juice box on our front walk. Didn't even look back. I went upstairs. Leona was in the attic, lying on the floor beside the window. She hadn't cried yet. That's what scared me. She was too quiet. "I thought they liked me," she said finally. "I thought maybe I was different this year." I knelt beside her and told her the truth. That the world can be ugly and people can be cruel. That sometimes, you don't get a reason. That she's worth everything even when the world doesn't clap for her. She nodded. She held my hand. And that's when we heard it. A low hum. A chopping sound in the air. Distant at first, but growing louder. I looked out the attic window. A helicopter was descending into the open field across the street, the old drive-in lot, now just weeds and forgotten gravel. I ran downstairs. Leona followed. The whole house buzzed like a drumbeat. By the time we made it to the porch, the helicopter had landed. Dust swirled in the air. The neighbors had come outside, some with phones out, others just gawking. The door of the helicopter opened. Out stepped people in uniform. Soldiers. At least a dozen. One by one, they formed a line, holding banners and signs that read, "Happy Birthday, Leona. We Red Heart Our Star on Earth. Vega says hi." And then they started chanting, "Leona. Leona. Leona." My daughter froze beside me. Her mouth opened in awe. A woman in uniform, tall and commanding but with kind eyes, approached us. "Are you Leona?" she asked. Leona nodded. "You wrote us letters. Dozens of them. Every week. You don't know us, but we know you." I was speechless. The woman introduced herself as Sergeant Rivera. She told us that Leona had been writing to an overseas pen pal program, one I hadn't even known she joined through her school's reading club. Her letters, Rivera said, had made it across half a dozen countries, passed between units, taped to walls and barracks, and read aloud at mealtimes. "You reminded us what we're fighting for," she said. "You gave us hope. And now they had come to say thank you." Leona didn't say anything at first. Her eyes were wide, her hands gripping the hem of her dress so tightly her knuckles turned white. Then she whispered, barely audible, "You read them?" "All of them," Rivera said, smiling. "I carried one in my vest pocket during every mission." The other soldiers came forward slowly, a few carrying small packages, gifts, some wrapped in brown paper, others hand-drawn cards with stars and moons. One young man, maybe 19 or 20, with freckles and sandy hair, knelt down in front of her and held up a drawing she'd made, a wolf under a night sky. He had laminated it. "I kept this above my bed," he said. "When I was scared or homesick, I looked at it." That's when the tears finally came. Not loud, not messy. Just quiet streaks down her cheeks, her chin trembling as she took the drawing from his hands. I couldn't speak. My throat was tight. My heart was thudding in my chest. More neighbors were now gathering across the street. A few of them were parents of the children who hadn't come to the party. I saw Noelle's mom. She was recording with her phone, her mouth slightly open. The mayor, of all people, showed up about 10 minutes later, flustered, adjusting his belt, trying to make it seem like this was part of a planned town event. It wasn't. But nobody cared. Nobody looked at him. All eyes were on Leona and the group of soldiers who had come not to save anyone from a fire or a flood, but just to say thank you to a little girl who believed the world still had space for kindness. Rivera turned to me then. "She has a gift," she said. "Don't let anyone take that from her." I nodded. I couldn't even get a single word past the lump in my throat. Leona finally found her voice. She asked if they wanted cake. And I swear, those soldiers, battle-hardened, sunburnt, some probably with more trauma than we could imagine, cheered like it was the best idea they'd ever heard. So we cut the cake. The same drooping, lopsided cake she'd been holding in her hands hours earlier, the one we'd thought no one would ever taste. She served every single person a slice, even went inside to bring out juice boxes, offering them like a hostess at a royal banquet. One of the soldiers took the cotton candy machine and actually made fresh cones for the kids who started trickling in from nearby houses. By 5 p.m., we had a full yard. Not the people we'd invited, but new faces. Real faces. People who wanted to be there. People who showed up. One of the soldiers asked if she could read one of Leona's letters out loud. Leona nodded. She pulled a folded sheet of lined paper from her pocket and began to read, "Dear friend, I don't know if you'll ever read this. But I hope you do. I hope you're safe. I hope you get to see the stars at night, even if they're through a tiny window. Sometimes I feel like people don't hear me here. But I write anyway, because I believe someone out there might understand. I want to be brave, like a wolf. They don't always howl. Sometimes they're quiet. But they're still strong. Maybe you're a wolf too. From your star on Earth, Leona." By the end of the letter, 2 of the soldiers were crying. Real, open tears. And Leona, she was glowing. A different kind of glow. Not happiness. Something deeper. Belonging. When the sun began to dip below the trees, the soldiers started to gather their things. They took group pictures with her. Gave her patches from their uniforms. One gave her a bracelet braided from paracord. Rivera turned to me as they loaded back into the helicopter. "Your sister said she's like you," she said. She meant it as an insult, but I think it's the highest compliment I've ever heard. Then she added, quieter, "We all need more people like you too." They lifted off with a roar and a cloud of dust. The field slowly cleared. Neighbors returned home. The music faded. Candace had texted me sometime in the chaos. "Just one message, I didn't mean it like that. Call me." I didn't respond. Leona sat on the grass afterward, her shoes off, toes in the dirt, holding the laminated drawing in her lap. She looked so small. And so unbreakable at the same time. "Do you think they'll write back?" she asked me, not looking up. "I know they will." And then we just sat there, side by side, beneath the stars that had begun to poke holes in the twilight sky. For once, we didn't have to say much. The silence was full. The next morning, I woke up to find Leona already downstairs, sitting at the kitchen table, still in her pajamas, the laminated wolf drawing beside her, and a pencil in her hand. She was writing. Not in her journal this time, but on real stationery. She had pulled out the special paper I kept for thank you notes. The kind with the subtle gold trim that I never used. I watched from the hallway for a moment. Her back was straight. Calm. Focused. Then she looked up at me and said, "Can you help me spell deployment?" I smiled and walked over. That morning, she wrote 10 thank you notes. Each one different. Each one detailed. Thoughtful. One to Rivera, one to the young soldier who had carried her wolf drawing, one to the medic who had braided her paracord bracelet. She remembered every single one of their names. After breakfast, we drove into town to mail the letters. At the post office, the clerk recognized Leona from the night before. You're the girl from the field, he said, blinking like he wasn't sure if he was dreaming it. With the soldiers. Leona nodded. He smiled. You made this town feel proud again. I hadn't realized how far the story had already spread. People in line behind us were whispering. I heard fragments, helicopter, the little girl, the wolves. One woman actually patted my arm and said, "You're raising a real light in the dark." It was kind. But surreal. When we got back home, there was a small stack of envelopes stuffed into our mailbox. Handwritten. Different stamps. One was from Colorado. One from a base in Texas. One from somewhere overseas, Germany, I think. Leona clutched them to her chest like treasure. We opened them at the kitchen table together. Inside were letters, honest, raw, grateful. Some short, others pages long. One included a drawing of Leona and a pack of wolves, each with military hats. Another had a photo of a soldier holding up one of her letters, his bunk bed and gear behind him. They called her Star. Little Wolf. Guardian of Hope. I don't know how to explain what those letters did to her. She didn't smile in that usual polite way. It was different. Like she'd shed a weight none of us had seen her carrying. That same week, her teacher called me after school. I don't know what happened, Mrs. Tisdale said. But Leona volunteered to read aloud today. That's a first. Apparently, she stood in front of the class and read one of her letters, her letter, one she had sent weeks ago. And she wasn't nervous. Even Noelle came up to her afterward and said, "I wish I had come to your party." Leona had simply shrugged and said, "It's okay." Later that night, when I tucked her into bed, I asked if she was upset about the kids not coming. She shook her head. "I think they just didn't know me yet," she said. "But now maybe they do." The next few days were a blur of media calls and mailbox surprises. Apparently, someone had filmed part of the helicopter landing and posted it online. It had gone viral. Thousands of views. Then tens of thousands. By the end of the week, over 1 million. I started getting calls, from a local news station, then a regional one. Leona's story had captured something people were desperate to feel again. Kindness. Innocence. Something pure. At first, I told them no. We didn't want attention. But Leona surprised me. "I want people to know how important letters are," she said. So we said yes to one interview. A quiet one, with a local reporter named Julia who wore thick glasses and didn't once ask Leona to act cute. Julia let her talk about the wolves, the stars, how she imagines letters like light traveling through space, and how sometimes people don't need you to fix anything. They just need to hear something soft in a hard place. The article came out the following Sunday. The headline read, "Star on Earth, the 11-year-old who reminded a town, and the world, how to show up." The story spread even more. A bookstore in Albany offered to host a Letters and Wolves reading event. A retired Army captain from Vermont drove down just to shake Leona's hand. Even the school principal sent a letter home acknowledging the positive impact she had made on the student body. And yet, in the middle of all this, Candace showed up again. This time, she didn't knock. She just appeared on our porch one late afternoon, holding a manila envelope and a bottle of sparkling cider. I saw her through the window. My first instinct was to ignore it. To let her stand out there in her guilt, let the wind chill her into reflection. But Leona had already opened the door. Candace looked off balance. Less polished than usual. Her eyeliner smudged, heels in her hand, bare feet on the porch. "Hey," she said. Leona looked up at her. "Hi." Candace cleared her throat. "I owe you a real apology." I stayed back in the hallway, listening. She sat down on the porch step. "I said something cruel. Something that didn't come from anything but my own fear. I was always jealous of how people loved your mom. And now you've got that same thing. That light." Leona didn't say anything. Candace pulled something from the envelope. It was a photo, faded, edges frayed, of the two of us as kids. In that same yard. A birthday party, maybe mine. Me smiling. Her scowling off to the side. I never felt seen. But that's not your fault. And it sure as heck isn't hers. She pointed at Leona. I'm sorry. Leona looked at the photo. Do you want cake? She asked. Candace blinked. You have cake? We always have cake now, Leona said. And just like that, Candace was back in the house. Not forgiven. But present. She sat quietly as we cut slices from a new box cake Leona and I had made the night before, yellow cake with chocolate frosting and sprinkles shaped like stars. She didn't talk much. Just chewed and watched us. I didn't know if things with her would ever be right again. But something had shifted. She finally saw us. Not just Leona. Me. Not as a broken version of someone she used to compete with. But as someone whole. Or at least, someone becoming whole. As the weeks passed, life began to settle into a new rhythm. The whirlwind of attention faded just enough for us to breathe again. Leona still received the occasional letter or care package. One from a base in Okinawa even included a stuffed wolf wearing a tiny handmade dog tag that read Star. But the parties and press and fanfare? Those quieted, thankfully. What didn't quiet was the shift in the people around us. Neighbors who hadn't said more than a polite nod for years suddenly started waving, dropping off muffins, asking about Leona's next school project. Even her teacher, who once treated her as just another shy kid fading into the back row, started giving her opportunities, class helper, morning announcements, even asked her to help design the spring reading program. But the most satisfying part wasn't the attention or the feel-good story the town clung to. It was what happened the day the school hosted its annual Friendship Fair, a sort of low-stakes social event meant to encourage students to showcase their talents and connect over shared interests. Last year, Leona hadn't gone. This year, she had her own booth. She called it Letters from Earth. We printed copies of her most thoughtful letters and hung them on string-like banners. She had a little typewriter on the table, a gift from one of the soldiers, where kids could sit down and type their own short letters to anyone they wanted, a friend, a stranger, a soldier, a family member. I watched as a line formed at her table. Not just out of politeness, but out of real interest. Kids sat down and typed, talked to her, laughed. Even Noelle sat with her for 10 minutes. I watched them from a distance. Noelle leaned in and said something. Leona giggled. They looked like real friends. And then Candace showed up. Late, of course. But this time, she wasn't alone. She brought her boys, and her ex-husband. That was a surprise. I hadn't seen Paul since before they split up. He was tall, always slightly hunched, with a kindness in his voice that didn't quite fit Candace's sharp edges. Apparently, they'd been working on co-parenting better since the party. Candace waved at me and leaned close. I read her letters, she said. Every single one. Twice. I didn't say anything. I just watched her boys hand Leona a handmade card, completely unprompted. Leona smiled and tucked it into her little incoming mail basket. Candace fidgeted. She wasn't used to being outside the spotlight. You've done good, she said finally. Better than I ever could have. I let the silence sit for a beat. Just long enough to matter. Then I smiled, gently, and said, That's the first honest thing you've said to me in years. She laughed, but it didn't sting. Not this time. Because the real revenge? It wasn't yelling at her. It wasn't shaming her in front of others or cutting her off forever. It was this. Watching my daughter, who had once stood alone at her own birthday party, now surrounded by children who respected her, adults who admired her, and even family who had once cast her aside but were now slowly, awkwardly, finding their way back. It was having nothing to prove anymore. It was winning quietly. With grace. And maybe a little glitter. After the fair ended, Leona and I walked home. It was warm out, the kind of spring warmth that comes with birdsong and sidewalk chalk. "Do you think it's weird that people are finally noticing me?" she asked, skipping a bit ahead. "No," I said. "I think they're finally catching up." She turned, walking backward, her smile relaxed and open. "Do you think Aunt Candace meant it?" "Some of it," I said. "And that's a start." At home, we sat on the porch, our legs dangling off the side, drinking lemonade with too much sugar. Leona looked up at the sky, just starting to darken. "I'm gonna write tonight," she said. "Who to?" She shrugged. "Maybe to someone who hasn't been found yet." I nodded. That made perfect sense. Because sometimes the people who need your light most haven't come out of the shadows yet. And my daughter? She was a lighthouse now. Steady. Shining. And one was ever going to dim her again.